Welcome, and thank you for tuning in. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. On the program today, we're joined back with Reverend Violet Young as she shares her wisdom about the need for love and small acts toward others in day-to-day life. She says we can choose to stay aware of when we are in love and out of love. And this way, explains our guest, we can monitor our behavior and mold ourselves back into staying in a place of heart and love, encouraging us to allow love to be our guidance system. I mean, after all, take a look at the negativity around us and how we wake up to remember that we are in love in a world that needs it the most. And it's also our personal responsibility as well to be aware of and stay in command of what we take into ourselves. I'd like to welcome to the Beyond 50 radio program today our guest, talking about the topic of what the world needs now is love, and you can make that happen, Reverend Violet Young. Ms. Young, thank you for being on the Beyond 50 radio program.
Hello, Daniel. It's always a pleasure to talk with you.
Well, it certainly is, especially when we can remove certain obstacles and glitches that seem to get in our way when we want to talk about something as commanding and wonderful as love. And this all started with you with a hit from Jackie Del Shannon back in 1965. Tell us about that.
Well, that song came out, and it was everywhere. I mean, it was just going constantly on the radio, and every time I'd hear it, I would just stop what I was doing and sing it. It didn't take me long to get it. I was in the chorus at school anyway. And I sang around the house, and I would just listen to the words and soak it all in and think to myself as I was watching the Vietnam War play out on TV, boy, is that true.
Absolutely.
And, I look at that time and I realize, we had the situation with the racial equality, with school desegregation and Vietnam War, and it was all over the nightly news, and people were as unsettled then as they are now, basically. And it's true, though, that what the world still needs is more love. So I think that when I was deciding what to write this year, I always try to stay positive, and I live my life in that way, looking at situations as opportunities to choose something else. You know what I mean? So that song title was what I decided to create for my article this year.
Now, before we talk about your article just a little bit that people can go and find out, but it's really fascinating just how much when people turn on the TV, you take a look at magazines, cover stories right there when you're at the checkout line of, getting your groceries. And having been in journalism myself for many years and broadcast journalism, there seems to be, the bottom line is if it bleeds, it leads. And it's really unfortunate that we have that way, but there's so much truth. Take a look at the fact when you're caught in a traffic jam, when you finally get through it, you realize it was that one or two lanes that was stalled all to watch basically, let's say, a car crash that really wasn't impeding traffic. It was everybody watching and taking a look at that to realize, and I'm sure the thoughts in their mind is, oh, that's terrible, but better them than me, kind of a thing.
Well, it's an interesting thing. Where I live on the coast, when we hear sirens, it's really scary because, I live right on 101, and 101 in a lot of places on the coast is a two-lane road. And although it's a highway, it's still a two-lane road. And every time I hear a siren, the first thing I ask for is the angels to go and help whoever needs it. And when I see a car wreck or something, my whole thought process is there anything I can do to help? And usually one of the best things I can do to help is keep on driving if it's being under control. I don't want to see it, but it is true that becomes, it's not, I don't want to say the word it's a form of entertainment, but the curiosity factor that humans have is pretty interesting. And the whole idea of if it bleeds, it leads is very true. And it is, the more miserable people can be, the more papers it sells, which is disturbing.
Yeah, it's very disturbing that we not only court misery, but we tend to celebrate it a lot of times.
It is. I mean, I I I look for other ways to look for the news. I enjoy looking at the things you post because so much of it is positive and people are looking to do positive things in the world. And at this particular juncture, I have a phone app for, I don't know if it's okay to say this, but I have a phone app that takes me to the Good News Network. And all they post are stories that are positive. It isn't that I don't want to know what's going on in the world. It's that what's going on in the world at the moment is just like what's been going on in the world before. And if we don't look for the good, we're going to be mired in the muck for a very, very much longer time. And I think it's time for us to crawl out of that muck, personally.
Well, you have to think about, too, especially the sages over the centuries that shared many ways of wisdom for the world. And one of the things that's completely true, and if people listening would really pay attention to this, maybe even meditate on it, that you tend to become what you focus your attention on.
Yep.
And it's funny because as I finally began to see that more and more, not just maybe in my life because I'm focusing on one thing, but that was part of it. But when you can begin to catch your thinking and begin to shift it, it doesn't matter what direction, but just try this, that you begin to notice the outside world shifts with you. In other words, you really do shape your reality. Now, some people might argue, well, what about this and this and this? And that doesn't mean those things don't happen. In fact, I remember an astronomer one time where I got that aha moment I didn't think about before, and that is this. He says, look, a lot of people, we live in a galaxy, the Milky Way galaxy. It's part of what's called a spiral galaxy. And he says the spiral galaxy of all galaxy types is the most well-ordered of all the galaxy types. And he says, now, here are some other galaxy types, and one of them that was pretty scary was what was called an elliptical galaxy. And he says, this is a galaxy that is of the most highly disordered type. So imagine you're a planet in one of these galaxies, and all of a sudden, a star comes flying through and blows that planet right out of the water just because of all the chaos. There's no order in it, And I thought about that. He says, now, just thinking about those two paradigms right there when it comes to the universe, and these are natural laws, he says, what makes humans feel that in a world of such order that chaos won't exist anyway? And I thought of that, and I thought, okay. And then you hear, again, back to the sages, for instance, that say, well, it's a matter of how you act or react to circumstances, let's say be they negative, that determines, how quickly maybe you move through and perhaps learn your lesson from this. So that all being said, to our listeners out there, let's say that you're focusing on negative news. How often do you find yourself in negative situations? Now, as you were saying, you like to focus on positive news, acts of kindness, things like that. You're looking out for it. In other words, you seem to look at a world of gratitude. So don't you find more and more things to be grateful for? That doesn't mean that bad stuff doesn't creep in. I mean, back to the chaos of the universe again. But yet you see more of that. Let's go ahead and kind of look at it that way from your perspective.
Well, the whole idea, I mean, we're all a bunch of amazing individuals, but each one of us has the opportunity to choose, if we become conscious enough about it, to choose how it is we want to be. Now, I remember I had a group of friends when I lived on the East Coast many, many, many years ago, because I've lived on the West Coast for more than half my life now, where, we'd call each other every day and we would bemoan our situation. And so what we had was a negative gab fest every day. something went wrong, and all we would do was broadcast it out to each other. And, we had a group of people that had a whole lot of stuff happening to them all the time. And I moved to California, got involved in a new thought way of looking at things where I became more aware of what my thoughts were. Now, everybody's going to run into some situation. You're going to get stuck in traffic. You're going to get this. Something's going to happen. And it's all in how you receive it. And so, when things occur, I do my very best to be conscious, staying in a place of love. And it's like I talk about love as our guidance system. And it just means that we make choices every day. Are we going to look at people in a positive light and assume that most people are positive, caring, loving people? Or are we going to turn the spotlight on people who, are doing heinous things and think that that's the entire world? And I find in my life, and maybe I'm just insulated because I live in small communities on the coast, I find in my life that there are a lot of good people doing a lot of good things for a lot of other people. And that's what I choose to shine my light on.
Right, exactly. And you begin seeing a lot more of it, don't you?
Oh, yes. And, living a life with gratitude, I get up in the morning, I have a view of the ocean. As a child, I always wanted to live by the beach. I was 46 when I moved to Yachats. And I am grateful every day, numerous times a day, for being able to live in this environment, in this community. I never take it for granted. It's really important to me. And I've tried to integrate myself into the community to create a force for positivity. And so far, I'm succeeding quite nicely.
It's fascinating, too, when I consider the article that you wrote. I had spent my time some years back, and I still do to this day, kind of researching and looking into the idea of subliminal persuasion.
Uh-huh.
And this is the idea that something can be what they, as a marketing expert, Williams would say, he would say, they find ways to slip messages past what's known as the sentry of your brain. A sentry basically is someone who stands guard. So in your brain you've got this ability to block things from coming in that you don't want. But in subliminal persuasion, this is the way that sneaky little cat burglar gets around this guy and gets into your brain. And so it was a really fascinating study over a couple of years that I had did on my own, looking at propaganda, what is the nature of this, how did all this start, how does it all work, subliminal persuasion. And I realized, whether people think they're being persuaded or not, they really are. And so one of the ways when I would sometimes get into a little bit of a debate with somebody who tries to use their intelligence to say, well, there's no way subliminal persuasion works, they've proved that, whoever this mysterious they is.
Uh-huh.
And I would say, okay, well, let's take a look at this for a minute. Okay, did you ever notice that when you're driving on a busy boulevard, how many fast food restaurants there are? McDonald's, Burger King, you name it. And I said, how often do you find yourself pulling into those places under the belief that you're actually hungry? Okay, now, that being said, and then once you eat, did you ever notice that not too much long after you've stuffed yourself, you feel hungry again? Now, that is because you pull in, it isn't because you're really hungry, it's because you're having the feeling of anxiety of what it is to drive down a busy boulevard in the first place, what it really takes to do that, the mind power, right? Exactly. So going into one of these fast food places, I suggested, you eat simply because it helps to relieve that anxiety that you have within yourself. So they'll sit and they'll stew on that for a minute and said, that kind of makes sense. And I said, okay, now that you know this from that simple bit of awareness, how often do you find yourself making purchases and realizing you don't like them all that much once you've made them? Whether it's clothes, it could be a car, it doesn't matter what it is, that you really go out and you buy something and you realize, I feel better in the moment. Were you trying to keep up with a lifestyle that somebody says you kind of fell short from having, and you're buying it for that reason? Or do you buy it because it truly and sincerely brings you fulfillment? Once they see that fast food ideal that I've shared with them, they start saying, you know what, you're kind of right about that too. I said, now let's take a look at advertising, as a whole, and how they have been able to get their little cat burglar past your century to get you to do things that you normally wouldn't do. What do you think about that?
Oh, I completely agree. It's like one of the things that I've noticed myself about advertising, and I no longer have any kind of television at my house. I don't have any. I mean, I get my news off of the net. I go next door to my girlfriend who has a Roku player, and she gets the news, but it's a day late or hours later. One of the things I don't miss are the thousands and thousands of commercials that are coming at us faster and faster and faster, telling us what we don't have. I am always amazed at how happy I am with what I already own and how I'm divesting myself of things on a pretty regular basis, and how cautious I am when I purchase things. But most of what I purchase has nothing to do with seeing it on an ad, because I don't have that constant bombardment. I noticed a number of years ago when my husband was a football fan and wanted to have the NFL network, and in order to do that you had to have a certain brand of cable dish network. So we got a dish, and we hadn't had TV for quite a long time. And so, wow, TV in a few years had really exponentially gone nuts with the ads. And I was recognizing, I was watching ads, but I didn't even know what they were for. My husband said, well, honey, you're not their target audience. And I thought to myself, that's probably good, because I didn't know that I needed something that desperately. It's all a matter of making you think you need something when people need to really think about what the difference is between what you want and what you need. And the way that advertising goes at it, everything is something that you need and can't live without.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
And, I like to think of advertising as informing us of what's available. Now, there's a different way of looking at it. Letting me know that I can get some product that does XYZ, washes dishes, vacuums the floor, does, does somersaults. Okay, now I can make a rational thought process decision based on whether I actually need that. I don't want to approach it from, oh my God, I've never seen this before and I can't live without it. It's just, that's not true. And when you realize that many, 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 many hundreds of thousands of people live without many of the things that we consider completely necessary, it kind of puts things in perspective. And I don't want to feel that I am less than, and that harkens back to what you were saying, less than because my lifestyle, in quotation marks, doesn't live up to what somebody else's thought process is about what I should want. I'm making my own decisions about these things. But I'm not bombarded every day by tons of commercials.
Right. And that's the thing, is you become aware of the obstacle itself, and you begin paying attention to what your thinking does, and then you find ways to say, well, I'm going to pause on this and make a sincere decision, for instance. Is that kind of like how the process works there?
Yes, a sincere sincere, authentic decision based on what my actual needs are. I remember once, many years ago, I was a newlywed, and I lived in an apartment that had all hardwood floors. The only rug I had was a throw rug, okay? I had a dog, a shepherd collie, who shed like crazy. And I decided I needed a vacuum cleaner because sweeping was just getting really irritating. Literally that dog, I don't know how he had any hair left. It seemed to be always on the floor. So I went to a major department store, and at the time, there were people in this major department store demoing vacuum cleaners. And I listened to this guy's hype about the vacuum cleaner. And when I got it home, I realized that because it had a beater bar on the floor part, I shouldn't be using it on hardwood floors. What did I have on my floors? I had a throw rug. Everything else was hardwood floors. But I had become so enamored of this guy and his sales pitch about the fact that this vacuum cleaner, and this is back in like 1978 or 9 or something, that this vacuum cleaner was going to save my life. It took me like 3 days, and I took it back to the store, and they said, well, what's wrong with the vacuum? And I said, absolutely nothing, but I don't have a rug.
Wow.
But that guy, my husband was like, why did you buy this? Well, the guy said, blah-de-blah-de, blah-de-blah, blah-de-blah, and I'm sitting there with a vacuum cleaner that I can't use in my apartment because my floors are hardwood. If I had used it, I would have beat the floors to death.
Oh, man. Crazy.
But that's how powerful that was my first adult foray into starting to understand how somebody can sell you something which doesn't even, did I tell the guy that I had hardwood floors? Yes. Yes, I did, but he managed to sell me a vacuum cleaner that doesn't work on hardwood floors. I was only 19.
That can happen.
I got it now. I'm going to look at something, and I'm going to determine whether or not that's going to work for me before I invest in it. Mm-hmm. And that's another way to look at things. It's like I'm investing things. When I'm going to buy something, I am converting my hard-earned cash into something else. And one has to determine how you want to convert your cash. Do you want it to be converted into this, or do you want to have liquid asset? And how important is that? And what's going to happen to it after you've bought it? How much packaging? It's sort of like Lily Tomlin said a long time ago. She went to the store and she bought a trash can. And when she got it home, she took it out of the bag and she put the bag that she'd bought it in into the trash can. And it just sort of, yeah, you're right. What am I doing with this product? And considering I really do try to look at things globally. When I'm buying things, it's like, how little footprint can I leave? And that's part of loving the world.
Now, we're at this point now that we can kind of see how we perhaps make the decisions we do, how we have the kinds of attitudes and biases we have when things do happen in the world. How do we move from a position, for instance, let's say, I think there's one proponent capacity all of us have, and that's this need for retribution when we feel wronged about something.
Right.
And how often, especially when we didn't do anything in that moment, for instance, perhaps you feel jaded or cheated at your job, your boss or a coworker did something that really just upsets you. So you replay all these scenarios in your mind about, boy, how I'd like to get back at him, but you didn't do anything.
Yep.
Yeah, how you overcome that kind of thinking, because obviously as you replay that moment over and over, that's sort of that attitude we were saying earlier. You're beginning to try to see out there in the world evidence of what you're experiencing inside of your world. And if inside of your world you're replaying the sense of retribution, again, unlike gratitude, more likely you're going to see more reasons to want to go and get that vengeance.
Right.
And how we can shift that.
Well, that's why the article I wrote talked about using love as our guidance system and recognizing that people do all kinds of weird stuff. Sometimes they do it out of anger and frustration. Sometimes they do it because they've plotted about it. But at the bottom line, I do believe that most people, and when I say most people, what do I mean? I think that we are all wired to have love as our guidance system. And a lot of how we approach the world is how we were taught. And it calls to us, as we become mature, to recognize these things. And that means that there's a level of consciousness involved. And everybody hits their level of consciousness at different times in their lives. I'm now teaching classes at the Oregon Coast Community College, and one of the classes I teach is called Have a Pleasant Present, and it's about recognizing how it is we have been aimed to think. So one of the first things we do is we explore the students' backgrounds a little bit. We ask how they were brought up. And do you think you were brought up in a family with positive as a focal point or negative as a focal point? And some people in the course of the class are really awakened to the fact that a lot of their upbringing was not positive. And they start looking at it with a different lens. Now, it wasn't that their parents, for the most part, weren't nice people, but their parents may have come from the Depression. They may have come from oppression, and that colors what they see. And as that happens, we're imprinted with this without even recognizing it, because people start teaching their children things long before a child can say, hey, wait a minute, that's not what I want to learn. And I do believe we all come into the world having love as our guidance system, but sometimes that love part is kind of pushed aside. So that's why a lot of times when people go into drug and alcohol recovery, they become such different people because they were set on a course that they didn't necessarily want to be on. And when they got sober or clean and sober, all of a sudden all that stuff is kind of washed away a bit, and they're able to actually see how they want to be, and they then take steps of their consciousness helping them along the road. And that's one of the other things I wrote about, why I wrote this article, is to help people wake up a little bit. I'm sure it's going to resonate with a lot of people, but I'm also sure that there's going to be people going, oh, what does she mean?
Right.
I don't understand this, and that's okay, because not everybody gets the message right off the bat. But I think that there's a cumulative opportunity when you see things happening that are positive. And if you can stay focused on that and feel good about it, when you do something nice for somebody, you feel good. You make somebody else happy, and you are also getting the fall off of that. So it becomes, is it altruistic, or is it, is it you're both happy? Is there anything wrong with both being happy? Not really. It's a nice feeling, and when you do nice things for people and they respond in a way that is positive, it makes you want to do it more often. So my goal with the article is to really help people recognize that we are way in more command of our thought processes. All we have to do is recognize that. We make a million choices every day. And even when, as I mentioned in the article, we do certain things kind of in a rote way. You know, you get up, you use the bathroom, you brush your teeth, you do all these things. The more conscious you can be of those small things, the more aware of yourself you are. Sort of like when you're driving down the road. Have you ever gone right past your turnoff because you're on autopilot? Does that mean, you know, you're just driving down the road and you realize you've missed your exit like 15 miles before? Where the heck did that turnoff go? You were on autopilot. You missed it. Now you have to figure out how you're going to get back there. So you take the next turn and you sort of stop for a minute and you try to determine how you're going to go back. Now, do you want to have a good time going back, or are you going to moan and cry about what time you've lost? I always think, well, there's an opportunity to look at something new. And, you know, you never know what you're going to see around the corner. The more conscious you can be in the moment, the less likely you will be to miss your ramp.
Yeah. Mhm. And it's funny too in that moment when you're in that position where you could be aggravated, for instance, like road rage, and you realize if you could just catch yourself in that moment of frustration, you
Yeah.
go, wait a minute, why don't I just take a second and do that count to 10 rule perhaps and relax?
Yes.
You know, I'm stuck in traffic and I realize I'm hitting every red light and I'm already late for wherever I'm going.
Yep.
But if you can catch your moment and relax and go, you know, for some reason I think I'm going to actually make this anyway. And I was in one of those situations where I just finally said to myself, you know, is it okay if I just allow this moment to be what it is? I found out not only was I on time to a place that I thought I was going to be late and it was going to be, you know, the situation would have been good, to a point where I was actually almost 25 minutes early. And I thought for sure I was going to be late, but I was completely wrong, and I just surrendered. I said, well, am I okay with how this day plays out? And I just said yes. Doesn't mean a little bit of anxiety wasn't there, but I just kept working with it, and I finally came to a point of relaxing, and I was really amazed at how it all turned out.
And if you do that every day, you'll be really amazed at the end of like 2 or 3 weeks. You'll go, wow, everything seems to be going my way. Well, you know, one of the things about the world now is a lot of times you go places and people are just not kind. So my goal is to help people be kind. And I look at the situation. Now, a lot of times if you need something, we're loath to ask for assistance. And because we've been taught in our culture, for the most part, that if you ask for assistance, you're less than. Because you should be able to do it yourself. How many times have you heard that growing up? You should be able to do this yourself. So I look at it this way. If I need something and I'm willing to let my guard down and ask somebody for help, I'm giving them an opportunity to be kind to me. And when I offer that opportunity for them to be kind to me, I can reap a benefit, but so do they. And if I feel like I take everything on myself, I become a martyr. I become, I'm always doing everything. Well, why is that? Why don't you just ask for help? Somebody's willing to help you. Oh, I didn't realize that. Well, most times, if you ask, a lot of times people are willing to help. And one of the things about the Good News app is that they point these things out a lot. And I think that's really cool, because when somebody steps in to help, it makes them feel, in a way, like a hero. And don't we all need to have that once in a while? And it doesn't have to be a big deal. I mean, I live in a tourist area, so I always think of myself as an ambassador to my town. And so if I'm downtown and I'm walking along the road and I hear somebody saying, gee, I wonder where we should go to eat, and I don't recognize them, I live in a very small town. It's really clear and easy to see who isn't local. And I interrupt them and say, oh, excuse me, I live here and I happen to overhear what you were saying. What kind of food do you like? Maybe I can help. And they're like, oh, my God, a local. Cool, because I'll give them a range of options. that means that they feel cared for. And what's nicer than feeling cared for? I'm happy they're in town. They're going to be visiting and enjoying our natural resources and enjoying the amenities that this town has to offer, and it's going to be helping the people that offer those amenities. And our town was welcoming to me. I want to do the same for others. So I'm more than likely going to say please and thank you. I'm going to let somebody drive ahead of me or cross the street or, stop. Because it's the nice and kind thing to do. Being kind is how you start, even just little tiny, tiny, tiny baby steps. When you can recognize that you have a choice to be kind or careless, that's a big deal. And you can take that kindness and just keep working on it until you can recognize how grateful you are that you woke up to being kind, because it feels really good. And it leads you down the road to compassion, understanding, forgiveness, and ultimately unconditional love.
And again, because you're sharing this kindness as you were talking about, Violet, you begin to find yourself in positions that you're doing it more often.
Yes. Yes, you do. And you also begin to recognize that where you thought you might be powerless to do anything to make the world better, that one little teensy bit of kindness will radiate, because the person to whom you're kind will go, wow, somebody was really nice to me. That felt really good. Maybe I should do that. And so instead of having the ricochet of misery, we can have the waterfall of kindness.
So let's go ahead and pose this as an exercise for our listeners from the point of view of what we're talking about today. So what would be the first, let's call them 2 basic steps, a person listening here today can begin to move into this particular paradigm? You're probably feeling like you have a negative life. Things just don't seem to ever work out. You kind of look outside and wonder, how come they always get so lucky? They get all the breaks, things like that, where they can change and see that they're beginning to experience all those things they seem to be in envy of.
Well, one thing is to recognize that there are a lot of people that would envy us.
I remember my wife, in fact, one day said, things didn't seem to be going so well many years ago. She says, you know what? If the world could all put their problems into one big pile, this one huge pile, everybody in the world can just throw their problems into this pile, and they take a look at the problems that are in that pile, most likely they're going to be wanting to go and take their problems back.
That's right. Yep, it may stink, but it's mine.
I own that.
Yep, exactly. It's a degree. I mean, I think it's really important for people to start small, because how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time, so to speak? So I think that if you're able to start saying please and thank you to people that you might ignore. I mean, how many times I'm standing at McDonald's, or I don't do fast food often, but I'm on the go a lot, so I'm in McDonald's, and I prefer to walk in instead of doing the drive-through, and I'm standing there, and people place their orders, and then they turn away, and they don't say nothing. They don't say anything to the cashier. The cashier is doing the best most of the time that they can. Hi, how are you? Blah, blah. And that warmth that they're trying to put out there is often ignored by the customer. Well, how would it be if you went up to the cashier and you said, hi, how are you today? Oh, my God, that's a twist. And if you actually listened, if the person said, oh, I'm having a great day, and then you can go on from there. Or if the cashier says, have a great day, and instead of ignoring them, you say, thank you, you too. It's a small thing, but it's a big thing, because it changes how we approach our lives. And instead of going, well, that clerk wasn't very friendly, which a lot of times, people have that attitude. You can actually turn somebody into being friendly just by being kind to them. And I always say this in my class, it's not rocket science, but if you are not aware of it, it's just completely, you're oblivious to it. So if I wanted to give anybody listening one little piece of advice, it would be start small and be kind. Look for places that you can be kind to somebody. Somebody drops something, you pick it up. Somebody needs help crossing the street. Somebody's struggling with a large load of something. You can step in and say, "Oh, may I help?" Somebody needs $1 at the, you're short some change at the checkout. I had an interesting experience. I was with a friend in the ER a few weeks ago, and I went to the hospital with her, and I hadn't eaten dinner, and it was like 8:30 when we got into the hospital. And by then, for some reason or other, hospitals think dinner is over at 6. The cafeteria wasn't open, and the guy in the ER got me a sandwich, and I was really grateful. I had no idea we were going to be there till 5 in the morning. So at 2:30, I was really starving, and I realized I had a $20 bill and a check. I had nothing. I had like 40 cents because I hadn't planned to go to the ER. And I went to the nurse's station, and I asked if anybody could break a 20. And they looked at me, and they said, "I don't think so, but here." And by the time I was done, I ended up with $5 in dollar bills and change, so that I could go down to the vending machine. So they sent me downstairs to the vending machine. And when I got to the vending machine, are you ready? There was a giant sign on it that said, "Out of order."
Oh boy.
I've got the cash in my hand and no place to put it.
Wow.
So I came back in from the vending machine, and the woman in the registration desk said, "Why are you laughing?" And I said, "The vending machine is broken." I said, "Are there any other vending machines in the building?" And she said, "Yeah, but they're behind 2 locked doors." Now, our interaction could have stopped right there. Instead, she made a phone call to speak to somebody named Steve. I didn't know who Steve was, and she's talking to Steve, and she's explaining my situation, and she puts down the phone, and she says, "Go back upstairs to the waiting room, and Steve will meet you up there with some food." I said, "Who is Steve?" She said, "The director of nursing." And I was like, wow, how cool is that?
Right.
So I went back upstairs, and Steve had indeed, he showed up within a couple of minutes with a tray with a sandwich and some fruit and some milk, and I took all the cash back to the nurses. I appreciated them for digging through their purses to give it to me, and I still ended up with food. And I was grateful and appreciative, and the people who were doing nice things for me were doing a lovely job, and what a lovely situation that was. Everybody got to feel good.
And that's so true, and I think it's kind of funny to realize just how often the world around you is willing to help. And it's funny when all you simply have to do, I was wondering if you'd be willing to help me out. Just even asking that question that well, they just go right into, yes, I'd love to help you.
Exactly.
I've never found a contrary way to that rule. Are you willing to help me? I was just wondering, are you willing to help me? And it's pretty amazing how that happens. And I have kind of a funny story in that line that kind of leaves you feeling pretty good about something as well. I remember years ago I decided to go to an early matinee at a theater to go watch a movie. This was a real early afternoon. So I decided to stop at the local Chinese place, and I went into their bar area there, decided to have a little drink before I go watch the movie. So all of a sudden, one of the girls, I guess, who works there, a Chinese girl, comes out, and there was a lot of confusion. There wasn't too many people in the bar area there, bartender and maybe 2 or 3 other people sitting there. Just a real quiet afternoon, and she's got this paper in her hand, and there's this confusion as she's talking to one of the waitresses and so forth and so on. And then all of a sudden, here's what happens. Does anybody here know what a paraphrase is?
Oh, how funny.
Now, what's funny about that, apparently this young Asian girl was a student, and this was part of her homework, and I said, what do you mean paraphrase? She says, well, and she brought the paper over, and I took a look, And basically all the homework assignment was is paraphrase these 3 sentences here. Okay? So I said, well, yeah, I know what that is. And what was funny about that is I was starting to explain it. I said, you know what, never mind. I'll just go ahead and paraphrase these, and then I'll show you what a paraphrase actually is as you see it. So I went ahead and I did this, and the girl got all excited. Her homework was done. Nobody else there seemed to know what a paraphrase was, which was interesting enough, because after usually a few drinks, most people paraphrase everything at least 3 times. And the next thing you know, they were so grateful they wanted to offer me another drink on the house. And I said, well, you know, I'm actually going to be getting ready to go to a movie here, but you know what? Could I have some barbecued pork as an appetizer instead? They said, absolutely. And I walked out of there thinking, you know, I have just broken basically an idea that I need to buy something with cash, that I had something of value in me that was valuable enough to get something I enjoyed back. Didn't involve a cash exchange, but just my knowledge of a paraphrase. Now, what made it funny is I was getting ready to leave. That seemed to just liven everybody up, that simple little thing right there. And I thought, it's kind of funny. And so I get ready to leave, and people were saying, hey, you know, enjoy your movie. And the one guy sitting over in the corner, just as I was about to walk in the door, and he says, hey. And I turned around and looked at him, and he says, thanks for the paraphrase. And then just the whole thing, even if I didn't go to the movie, the whole thing, and to this day I keep thinking about that whole transaction, how funny that all was, and how fun it was all at the same time. But
exactly.
The thing we're talking about here, for the listeners who may think, well, whatever about your story, is that is around us all the time.
That's right. And one of the things that people, I don't know, I think a lot of people are brought up with the idea that if they do nice things, it's a goody two-shoes thing. And, you know, I was always thought of, and still am, as the Pollyanna in my crowd. I am the first, I'm the Gracie Allen and the Pollyanna, because sometimes jokes go right over my head, like Gracie. But Pollyanna I may be, but you know what? I would rather look at the world in a positive way and be occasionally surprised than look at the world in a negative way and be constantly verified.
Exactly. It says I had a guest on the program some time ago. He says, do you know why we watch the news? And I said, go ahead and tell me why. And he says, because we all want to support our biases. And I thought, well, that's totally true.
Yeah. Well, you know, I recognize that we literally are the love that the world needs. And if we don't wake up, it's going to be hard for us to deliver what the world needs. And the world is needed for a long time, but, you know, needing and having, you got to watch out those words. It's like, we are the love. So start performing as if everybody was your relative that you care about. Would you let your sister or your brother or your mother or your father or your cousin or your uncle or your grandparents or your nieces and nephews struggle? And would you be so uncompassionate that you wouldn't recognize the need? That doesn't mean you have to provide everything, but it's easy to be kind. It's fun to be kind. It is. I look for ways to do that. You know, somebody can be wearing something and I think it's pretty and I blurt out, what a lovely outfit on you. And to see their faces light up because somebody noticed what they were wearing and appreciated it makes them feel good. What did it cost me? A thought and an action. And then I smile and they smile, and it makes their little space more friendly and more pleasant. And then they go off and think, oh, wow, that was really nice. Maybe I can do that for someone else. I mean, there are so many little tiny things like that. And, you know, when you're in a line at the supermarket, it's a great opportunity because people are kind of in an interesting place when you're stuck in lines. You can watch the finest and the worst if you're in a line.
Isn't that the truth?
Oh, you know, It's like somebody comes up behind me and they've got 3 items and I've got a cart full. Now, if I'm not being conscious, I can just go right ahead. And if I'm in a big hurry, I'm probably going to go ahead. But the likelihood is I'm going to say, oh, you've only got a couple of things. Would you like to go ahead of me? And they look at me and they go, oh, thank you. How hard was that? For the 4.5 minutes it's going to take for the checker to roll through that, is it that big a deal?
Right, exactly.
It's so simple.
Speaking of another fun quick story, and I think the reason we're both sharing these too is for the listeners to realize, they're right. This is all around me. How do I, now I can see how I can participate, and here's some interesting ideas. But speaking of the supermarket, I remember one night I was actually standing in line waiting to cash out, and there were these two young boys. I'd probably say they were right around 12, 13 years old. They had their big 2-liter bottle of pop, and they had their candy and some potato chips. And I just kind of smiled, remembering what those days were like to be that young. With your buddy out there buying some food, you're going to stow away maybe somewhere and junk food out.
Yep.
So they were at a point where they were kind of looking around in their pockets, and I know they had the money, I'm sure of it, But as they seemed to be spending time with that, I got the clerk's attention, and I said, "Here," and I gave him, I think it was a 20 or something. And then I put my finger to my mouth, quiet. So he goes ahead and he rings it all up, and he, and then gives me the change. And by the time the kids actually got their money out to hand to him, the clerk had bagged it up and he waved his hand, and they were like, "What?" All of a sudden they realized they didn't have to pay for it, and that must have just blown their mind. You can see the looks on their faces of confusion, like, "Wow, really?" And I was telling them, "Be quiet, don't let them know that I just did this." Because it's kind of one of those things I'm thinking it was enjoyable to be an observer of the situation, but isn't it fun when the mystery of life comes out there at you when you don't expect it?
Oh, yeah.
In ways that you didn't expect it to happen? And that's a lot of what we're talking about and how that reciprocity actually happens. It doesn't mean that you arrogantly go out there, "Oh, hi, I'm Joe Love, I'm here to make your day," kind of a thing. And you see a lot of that too. But you simply do it because it just feels fun to be in that moment, and the more mysterious you can be in that moment, in other words, like in Buddhism, to do an act of kindness without drawing any attention or taking any credit for yourself for the act.
Yes.
Which in this situation, I was enjoying observing the moment, but at no time did I say, "Yeah, that was on me," kind of a thing.
Exactly.
You realize that comes around, and you get to enjoy that mystery. You don't know when it's going to happen. But it always does.
Well, I used to be the person who had to be in charge of giving. Because it's easier in a lot of ways to give than to receive. And one of the reasons it's easier to give than to receive is that you're in charge. You're giving. When you're receiving, you have to be willing to receive, and sometimes what you get isn't necessarily what you wanted or expected. So it means that I'm at a place in my life, I'm 68, and I've lived a few years here, and I've done a lot for a lot. I mean, I live a life of service. I've known for a long time that's how my life is supposed to be. I love helping people. And I love having people around, and I am warm and caring, and I'm not blowing my own horn here. This is just who I am, and it's reflected in what I write and what I do. But it's okay. I finally got to the point a number of years ago that it's okay if somebody wants to do for me, because it's a connecting circuit. It has to go both ways, giving and receiving. So when people say to me, "Violet, may I take you to lunch?" Instead of going, "Oh, I can pay for my own, thanks," I go, "Thank you very much." And I revel and appreciate being cared and nurtured for. That was a bad sentence, sorry.
No, it works for me.
I revel in that because it's okay for me to receive.
Well, it's not only okay, but let's take a look at what you're talking about here. And a lot of people can be like this when somebody wants to do something for them. And that is, and one thought occurs to me is, then there's something inside of you that I think you need to heal to bring love to. And it's possibly the fact that perhaps you feel you don't deserve
exactly
people to be kind to you. And the fact is, you absolutely do deserve that. Otherwise, they wouldn't be coming to you in the first place. So, A, figure out where does this thought and this feeling actually come from? Where did it originate? And go back and heal that. See, there's that learning moment right there.
Exactly.
For growth and healing and all that. And it's pretty amazing. I remember years ago as I worked in the hospitality industry, and you'd see people come out to dinner, and there'd end up being this ensuing fight over who's going to pay.
Exactly.
And then they'd give me the dirty look, and I learned to say, you know what? Instead of giving me the dirty look, why don't you just say thank you to them for doing that, and you can take them to breakfast.
Exactly. Well, and that's, so somebody wants to take me to lunch or buy me dinner or whatever, I am so grateful, because a nurturing person who spends a lot of time nurturing puts a lot of energy out. And it's very nice to have somebody notice that and refill the tank.
There you go.
Because truthfully, how long can you drive a car on fumes?
Absolutely.
So, it's sort of like filling your love tank up. And the giving and the receiving, learn to receive gracefully and appreciate the person who's willing to offer that to you, and recognize that they are getting as much out of it as you are.
Maybe even in some cases a lot more.
True. It's possible.
Mm-hmm.
So, basically we can bring the world the love that it needs because we are the love. What we have to do is remember that we are the love. So doing nice things for their neighbors and strangers, being conscious, listening to more positive news. I know that there's, you can just Google positive news sites and you're going to find them. And look at those articles. I mean, it's everyday people doing nice things for other everyday people. I've read some really magnificent things about one guy was decided that he was going to shovel snow for all the older people in the neighborhood who couldn't do it. And so all of a sudden, he's at somebody's house that needs to get shoveled out, and he starts shoveling, and the person comes out and goes, "Who the heck are you?" And they go, "Well, I'm just trying to help." And they're appreciated for that, and the next thing you know, somebody saw that, and he had pretty much a whole crew shoveling out people. Because it was fun to do something nice for people.
Right.
It, like I said, it's not rocket science, and it's not really difficult. And every single person who's listening to this can learn to do at least one kind thing a day.
Right.
And, they have the random acts of kindness and senseless acts of beauty, and I call it radical kindness because I look for ways to be kind every day.
Right.
Radically. That's something, it's not something that's random for me. It's something that's I'm looking actively to participate in. And it keeps.
So the bottom line is, for listeners out there, everybody can do something.
That's right.
Just decide to do it. It really is that you have a choice. Decide to do it. Violet, it's been wonderful to have you on the program. We're just about out of time here. So is there websites and ways they can, for instance, find out about the article that we've been talking about and things like that?
Yes, the article is actually appearing in the program for my Pathways to Transformation Holistic Health, Psychic, and Crafts Fair happening this coming weekend in Yahat. And my website is chucklingcherubs.com. chucklingcherubs.com. And you can just go where it says event program, and this article that I wrote is on page 4, I believe. And it's called What the World Needs Now is Love, and you can make that happen.
Well, very good. Violet, thanks for making it happen here for myself as well as our listeners here. It's been a pleasure to have you back on the program again.
And thank you, Daniel, for the great opportunity to have that conversation.
You bet. We want to thank you, the listeners out there, for having your act of kindness by tuning in and listening to the wonderful show that we have. Pass it on to others and let them know about it and how they can do random acts of kindness and even maybe unrandom. It doesn't matter. It's all your choice on how you want to do it, but it sure feels good when you take that action. Also, while you're taking those actions, take action toward going to beyond50radio.com. That is the number 50, we do encourage you to sign up for our weekly e-newsletter to keep posted on what's going on in the world of Beyond 50 as well as our upcoming programs. I'm Daniel Davis. Thank you for joining us. This is the Beyond 50 radio program, and remember, live your day past halfway.